ladies and gentlemen, and I don't know everything there is to know about economics. There's a famous joke that if you laid all the economists in the world end to end, they would never reach a conclusion. So it sums up the profession. Graham's given us so many interesting things to talk about that I really want to take a few minutes and just throw a few general points in the air, because I think we need to get into the session with the man himself. Let me start with one simple proposition. Since the time of Thatcher and Reagan, the dominant political message in the media at election time is, we should pay less taxes. Vote for me because you'll pay less taxes. Now, that is morally indefensible because we live in a community, we live together, we have to run an economy, we have to build roads, we have to run a hospital. There's a public realm we have to pay for. And a politics that begins by saying, let's pay less taxes regardless, is actually anti-community. It doesn't matter whether you believe in the United Kingdom, believe in Scotland, whatever. It's anti-community. It's a false premise, it's a false place to start. And I think at least Graham is giving us the chance. So let's talk about a taxation system that we can embrace, one that works, one that's efficient, absolutely. Politicians shouldn't be allowed to spend money badly. But we need to fund the public realm. So we need to change the public discourse from one of let's not pay taxes to one of let's fund public services properly and let's see how we do it. And if Graham is moving us in that direction for that debate, that's well and good. Now, where I take a wee bit of issue with Graham, I'm going to throw this out, this is my trouble. The pot is only so big at any one point in time. So many people working, so much being produced. Right? So the pot is only so big. Call that GDP, gross domestic product. We can argue about how it's measured, but roughly there's a pot, we'll call it GDP. Now, because of the political move to reduce the amount of taxation, today in Britain, we now take about 33, the annual pot, we take that as taxes, and that funds public sector, public services. In countries in pensions, I think we've managed to fund their health service in a slightly better way, better social security provision, don't have food banks. Countries like France and Germany, the proportion out of GDP is nearer 50%. Some countries in Western Europe, Scandinavia, a little bit over 50%. So the problem is, in the annual pot, we're only taking to fund the health service, fund everything else, about a third, a wee bit more of a third of GDP. In countries which do it better, it's about half. We have to close that gap. And so my real question to Graham is, even if we took his system as one to work with, it doesn't get around that fundamental problem. At some point, if you want a better health service, if you want to provide a better pensions, and our pensions are some of the worst, state pensions some of the worst in Europe, we need to actually spend more, take more in taxation. Now, that's a hard ask, given 40 years of being told taxes are too high. And it won't become easy, but we have to start moving the debate in that direction. Now, I don't think we fill the gap between the 33, 34% of GDP in tax to the 50%. I don't think we fill that gap simply by upping our income tax. I think we have to find other ways of taxing people, which is why I think we should begin to look at other forms, new forms of taxation, like the one that Graham has presented us. I personally think the way we're going to have to go is towards taxing wealth. Now, we used to tax wealth, and other countries still do tax wealth, but the people who own the wealth don't like that, and so over the years they've tried, the underlines what's underneath this, this passion debate about let's not pay taxes, is actually the folk who own most of the wealth have managed to rig things so they don't pay taxes on the wealth anymore. So let me give you a little thought experiment to show what taxing wealth might mean. I looked up some of the numbers. Go back to just the 2 years before the Brexit referendum, because things have got a bit crazy post-Brexit in the economy. And the numbers are a bit more difficult to understand. But take the 2 years up to June 16, the Brexit referendum. In those 2 years, the value of wealth, stocks and shares basically, in the UK went up by 15%. Now, when stocks and shares go up by 50%, a lot of people have rushed out, built more factories and made more and been more productive, because the shares were already owned, they're just bits of paper, just notations on a computer. Basically, speculation was going on. But whatever happened, taxes were also coming down because George Osborne was happily cutting taxes. So, and the Bank of England was printing more pound notes through quantitative easing, pumping them into the economy. But however it happened, if you had a bunch of stocks and shares, on average, roughly, they went up 50% in value in the 2 years up to June 2016. Now, suppose we tax that 15%. Suppose we take it away for the public realm. The folk who owned the stocks and shares wouldn't have been any worse off, so they couldn't really complain. But suddenly that chunk of wealth, the extra wealth, would have, which basically risen from speculation, that would be with the exchequer. Now, it was roughly, if you actually turned that into pounds, sterling and pence, that speculative increase in wealth in those 2 years ran to something around £2 trillion. Or if you divided it up, that would have paid for 3 years of every single tax paid in the UK. Now, I present this just as a little thought experiment. Once you tax wealth, suddenly you can get the sums of money that you might need to pay for the health service, better schools, better pension. So I do think we have to shift the public debate in terms of different kinds of taxes, particularly begin to look at taxes on wealth. And property is one form of wealth, and it's the easy one, as Graham said, to tax because it's there. You're not making any more of it. You can't hide it. The ownership is can usually be made pretty clear, and therefore you can tax it. So I'll finish just with a couple of thoughts that came to me as I was listening to Graham. You'll have other questions, so Graham can come back. But the big problem with tax reform is how you get from here to there, because you run into not just vested interests, you run into a media that's going to raise a storm, and the Labour Party under Corbyn has already made a suggestion in England that they would move to some form of land tax. Good idea. Let's not have anyone. Let's not criticise people with a good idea. Even Jeremy Corbyn, let's do that, right? But the instant the Labour Party started talking about land tax in England, the Daily Mail, that wonderful intellectual journal that we all read, Daily Mail immediately leapt to the fore and said, "This is a garden tax." And so, Graham, the problem is going to be, if we move to some form of taxation like that, how we get from here to there. The political fight, it's not something that's easily done. Tax reform is the most difficult thing to do. There will be a deliberate bias and incentive for the powers that be in the media and the people who own the wealth to try and confuse the issue. And you can see, the headlines in the Scotsman, your garden is going to be taxed. So to work out how we get from here to there. And I actually think, of course that's always going to be the case, but I think one of the big issues that Graham has raised is that if you abolish all existing taxes and replace them with one grand slam with a ground rent tax, form of taxation, then the change is so horrendous that I would generally expect most politicians, even down high, might run a mile. So we have to figure out, we have to work our way through. I think some of the assurances that we had from Graham, you'd have to work harder to convince me, Graham. I think that ultimately, if we did have a ground rent form of taxation, there would be a great churn in terms of land ownership and land use. And I think that would affect land values. So I think a blanket claim that it won't affect your house value at all is probably a rather bold statement. And why that is important is because we have dug ourselves into a housing model in this country which I benefit from, probably most of you benefit from, but which is bonkers. We assume that house values will go up every year. The only reason house values can go up every year is because of restricted land supply, and because we have a mad credit system that gives people cheap credit so they can buy houses and push the price of houses up. House prices should not be going up. The thing that we need, one of the things we need most in our life, housing, should be getting cheaper every year. Instead, we rely for our savings and our future pensions on house prices going up. I think politically one of the issues that would emerge in moving to a ground rent tax very quickly, in the churn and the shift in land ownership and land valuation in the aftermath of it, it would impact on house prices. So you have to work. So I suppose what I'm saying, Graham, is you tell us more about how you are so sure that house valuations would not change. I think there's still a lot of politics in what Graham is offering us, because deciding on the bands, deciding on what's rough grazing and what isn't, deciding on the actual values that you put on the rents that were being paid, that would still be politics. That would still be subject to annual discussion and debate and votes at local authority level and Scottish government level. So I think actually being so certain about what you would then receive in the income stream over the years might be more difficult to calculate. Again, I'm not quite so sure what the impact would be on the nature of housing. I think it may be a good thing, might be a bad thing, but I can foresee that if you introduced a ground rent system such as this, that there would be pressure to build houses that were smaller and smaller, so they attracted less and less ground rent. And I'm not quite sure I think that's such a good idea. So I think there are some technical issues that bear some debate. That said, I personally do think we have to move towards some form of land taxation. And I do think it is quite correct that that land taxation has to start to extend into the rural areas. If you put me up against the wall with a gun in my face, I think actually the simplest way of starting to reform the taxation system in Scotland would be to begin by creating a local income tax and shifting some of the burden of income tax to the local level, because they're going to be more democratic. And I think they would therefore link much more in the way of public participation in the setting of taxes and spending taxes if it was done at a local level. And I'm very sad that the SNP, having spent several generations supporting a local income tax, seems to have abandoned that. I don't know whether we have or we haven't, just disappeared off any policy agenda from any senior SNP spokesman I've ever talked to. I think that tinkering around with the existing community tax is not going to work in the medium to long term. And I would think that actually you could effect an efficient reform with enough political debate to get a local income tax. But in the end, I would like to see a land value tax of some kind, because I think capturing the increase in the value of land that comes from property speculation and taking that to the public purse would be a better way of dealing with things, rather than letting private developers driving into Haddington tonight and seeing the tracts of new housing. People need the housing, but let me tell you, in the quality of the housing, and it's the uplift in the value of the land is going to the owners of the development companies. And I'd rather see that going to the public purse to fund public infrastructure here in Haddington and elsewhere. So, Graham, I'll stop there. Full marks for getting the debate underway, because the politicians have stopped debating taxes. They're frightened to talk about taxes. How we do it, I insist it has to be pragmatic, so we can get enough people to support the tax change. And yes, we need to tax wealth. And yes, we need to tax land.